So, Alka, great to have you. And after having known you over these years, firstly, kudos, Alka. Kudos on building a as deeply focused VC as healthcare. I love your passion and on adding sehat to the proverbial roti, kapda, or makan. I just love it. Roti, kapda, makan, and sehat as the basic needs of every individual. So just love it, and kudos for building a franchise, a brand from the beginning, and taking a leap from the US to India, taking a leap from such a structured and evolving career as in McKinsey, where you were. Talk a bit about it, Alka. Just tell me, how did it happen? What was that moment of madness, insanity? and actually tell me, how did you convince the family?
Honestly, one is thank you. It's just happy being here, and Rohit, it's been good knowing you and seeing your journey evolve as well. I'm lucky, I think. I have amazing parents who just told me to go explore, and they, in their minds, didn't have shackles. So they just, it didn't even occur to me till a long time later in life that gender was such a big issue, because in our family, um, boys and girls were just, my immediate family. It was, yes, it was not very common for women to work, but the way my parents sort of didn't make me feel any different. So this concept, when I hear that there are sort of, big distinctions and in the same family, it surprises me, because I too come from a very conservative Marwari family. So it isn't, and they're self-made people, but I don't know where they got it within themselves. I myself find it surprising, because I didn't make it easy for them. I broke a lot of rules. I did a lot of things on my own, and told them post facto. So, I'm like, why did you do it? How did you do it? It isn't even, it's like, we didn't even think about it. So I don't want to make it sound easy, because the older I grew, I recognized the biases. They came out more alive in places that I didn't think about it. And I'm assuming you're asking me about the gender a bit. So that's why I'm
Both the gender, the break. You broke many conventions. You broke the gender. You left the US, came to India. Many did, but you came at a time when your career was soaring. You did it from a very diverse and an awesome industry like consulting, being in McKinsey, and that to a partner. I guess at a very early age. That's what I remember. So I think you broke many molds. So talk about all of them.
Oh my God, you're going in my history at such a deep level. But look, I am a small town girl, right? So and I've said that before, because there was not enough education, or my parents really believed in education, I was sent to boarding school at the age of 4. I have a
Wow.
3.5-year-old son right now, and I can't even imagine how he will function in
I remember your son was a COVID baby, and
COVID
that's
baby.
that was the
Exactly.
time I was getting to know you, and there was Alka on the screen. We met, so we met literally on the we were COVID introductions.
True, true, true. So
Yeah.
yeah, I broke mold. I got married very late. I had a baby at 43. So, things like that, frankly, in every aspect, but I didn't think of it as breaking molds. So I went to boarding school, and at the age of 4, frankly, you don't realize, my mother tells me the day they left me in boarding school, I was telling them go away, because there was so many swings and so many places to play. And so I didn't even realize they were leaving me, and soon became friends, and teachers were very loving, and it is in the hills. So that became home. And I really give I really give a lot of credit to my boarding school days, right from the get-go. I had lots of friends. You had lots of stories. You had lots of points of view. You discussed everything. You played together. You studied together. So sort of a tolerance. You sort of learn tolerance of views, because you've got to go along with people even if you don't like the solution. There's loyalty at stake. There's all of that. So I think that experience really shaped me
Hmm.
in boarding school. And somehow, and my boarding school friends would probably listen to this. I was always the creative, giving ideas on what to do differently. And, there was this crazy program that was there in our school, which was called the thinking program. And you had to be creative in your thinking. So I knew I was always an ideas person, but not like today I can say I was an ideas person, but that time it was just like, hey, she's got good ideas, she's always
Yeah,
thinking something different. I did very well academically. Our school focused on pretty much well-rounded development. So everyone had to do drama, everyone had to do elocution and debate and sports and studies. So you sort of and eat well and know how to eat. In some senses, it felt like a finishing school as well. So did quite well there and followed people. It was a 600 people school from class KG to class 12. So very small that way. And in class 11 came to DPS Arkipuram, which of course is the opposite, extreme
absolutely.
of a very guarded school, very, all-rounded development. DPS, you have to fend for yourself. Even there, I was in a hostel. So the diversity of people I sort of constantly came in touch with really made me appreciate the different backgrounds, different points of view, and ability to move forward and along with them. So I think
Yeah,
that was a key sort of character attribute, if I can say, that I have. The other thing was optimism. I think it's just so, my DNA is so optimistic that something bad happens and I'm like, oh, I'm sure there's a reason. And then I'll cook up a reason and that'll get me up again. So I think those couple of traits, but academically also, I was fortunate. I did quite well. So, and the more you expose yourself, you think of opportunities. Frankly, for women at that time, it was doctor, civil service. Engineering was not considered a women's profession, or fashion design, funnily enough. There was this, those were the three sort of options
yeah,
here
absolutely. Remember that.
that it could do. So DPS was slightly different and did commerce because, somehow engineering was thought of as a very male world.
Yeah,
And did commerce partly also because the people were more fun, they were loud, they were boisterous, they were breaking rules, as opposed to the classic image of a nerd versus you want to have fun. And there was, after DPS, there was a crossroads of what do you do next. And I was just inquiring around, and people said economics is one of the toughest courses in DU. So I was like, oh, it's tough, let's do it. So you'll see a little bit of that pattern of challenging
yeah, yeah.
yourself
So
constantly. It's tough, let's do
challenging
it.
yourself. Yep.
Yeah, constantly. But it was more like, okay, tell me what's toughest to do and we'll do it. That sort of a mindset. Went to college, actually landed up academically topping university in eco. But again, I was at a crossroad because after, again, in LSR, it was having fun, just like studying, but having fun, doing things.
I've heard that about it. I've heard that
Uh,
about that. It's a place where both academic excellence and just being completely bindas go so hand in hand.
Totally, totally, totally. So actually, the next year, post college, was a transformative year for me because I had done so well. I had all the scholarships to do masters, and I was like, I can't imagine myself doing masters. And then I was like, okay, maybe I become a politician. There's this weird sort of thing happening in my brain. And I was like, okay, what do I need to do to become a politician? Okay, you need to sort of study law or study international relations. Like, there wasn't the internet. People forget there was no information in
I
1990.
still can't visualize Marwadi as a politician, by the way.
Array,
Even
come on, come on, come on. That's not true. That's not true at all. Marwadis, if they put their mind to anything.
look at that. That's where I
Uh,
challenge you.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing. One of my fundamental beliefs is nothing is rocket science.
Yeah.
Genuinely, you put your mind to it, you put some passion in it, put some hours in it, and you'll figure it out. Generally, so it was like, okay, what do you do next? And my parents, as I said, were from a small town, and I somehow just randomly picked international relations because it sounded good, right? Without knowing much about it, there was no courses in international relations in India. So it was like, okay, I can go to the US, but applying to the US that time was $100 for every school application.
Hmm.
And this is dial in modem time when there's no internet, you can't figure out the school. So you have some random uncles in Chicago, wherever, and they're like, come here and, whatever. So I had to take my GRE. I didn't have a passport till then. And it was like, so dad got a passport made for me. And he was like, if you have to study, why don't you come back to this small town in UP? And I was like, oh my God, if I go there, I'm going to be just there. They're not going to let me out. I had these notions of like someone getting married and then that's the end. I was like, no way, I'm not going back. So obviously parents use the only trick in the trade, which is we're not going to give you money to stay in Delhi. And I was like, and I'm all of 20 and I'm like, don't worry, I'll make my own money. So we had a little bit of a thing going on there. And I was crying at a friend's place, crying, not literally, but, like just complaining at a friend's place. And someone, funnily enough, said, oh, you have a very nice voice. I was like, really? Because no one, everyone talked of talent by academics, right? And I was like, really? So he said, we are doing some documentaries. Do you mind voicing them over? I was like, sure, like give me money.
Nice.
Fine. So I voiced some documentaries. I realized it's a very tough profession. Can't have spicy food. You have to gargle. You have to, the modulation of voices.
Oh, you went into serious stuff, it seems.
Not really serious. I was trying to
Like,
make,
you're being so watchful. It obviously meant you were at the deep end of the pool.
I was, but then I realized this is not what it is. And I landed up meeting a political guy at that point, and he was starting some magazine. This is the 50th year of Indian independence. And he was very well connected politically. And he's like, why don't you become a journalist with my magazine and you can raise money and you can do ads? And so I was like, how? And he's like, oh, you topped LSR, so you'll do anything. Something like that he made. So I remember at that point going and interviewing, I was just literally shadowing him for 2 months, where we were meeting ministers and he would just I remember meeting the civil aviation minister once, and he was like, he wanted to make it the official magazine of what do you call Air India or something. So he was just like, okay, what's the business plan? And I'm like 20 years old, and I'm like, I don't know, but whatever. I think I did well. But just because I was in need of money, then I did some TV show. I did timeshare. I taught English. I was just trying to make ends meet. And it was a fantastic time because people were giving you a lot of opportunities. Wherever I was going, I was getting a job opportunity. Like, why don't you come work with us? And I was like, wow, this is fantastic. Growing up, people want you, people want to work with you. And then I landed up managing 30-second milestone, which is now very popular. But that
Oh,
time
really?
it
Yeah.
was a,
It's right here in the neighborhood.
sorry?
I'm saying it's right here in the neighborhood, not too far.
Yeah. It was very interesting because I was like 20 and they asked me to manage the premises on marketing and promotions and events and things like that. And we did some really good events which got big coverage. And because I forgot to take my passport for my GRE exam, I was upset that, I was scared that my parents would get upset. So I said, oh, I also want to take CAT, some random thing. And I took the CAT and I cleared IIM Ahmedabad. I did well in GRE as well. GRE, obviously, international relations wasn't giving scholarship, and IIM Ahmedabad happened. And I was in two minds: should I do that, or I was getting a job with a travel company, which was basically telling me to travel all over the world and represent them. And I was like, that sounds so exciting. Think of a 20-year-old brain, and you got
Yeah.
IMA. I had a film thing, and I had this travel job, and I was like, IMA, who's going to go there? And then a lot of my friends were like, you can always do any
You're
of
crazy. You're
this.
completely crazy.
Yeah, because they sort of said, whatever. My parents were like, whatever you want to do. So I went to IMA, and of course, it changed the way I look at life, met different people. So, I mean, I can talk so much about any of this, but I think the three or four things that you probably take away, I roll with the punches a little bit. It's a little more instinctive. I tend to believe that if I put my mind to anything, I will be able to achieve it. I'm fairly tolerant to people's extreme views, and I can survive in that atmosphere. I can deal with a lot of uncertainty. So those are, as you said, more philosophy at the beginning. It's more character traits, and then like, oh, she's good at analytics and she's good at like solving a problem of I know Rubik's cube in 20 seconds. So it's frankly the intangibles make me who I am.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So Alka, we were having our own global careers. When we started Lumens, this was back in 2006, so 18 years ago. And At that time, the startup landscape was nothing like what it is today. From the startups per se to the investment landscape to the value unlocking stories which beckon you to the regulatory framework. Nothing was anywhere close to what it is. And I'll be lying to you if I tell you when we quit our global jobs and jumped into it, we thought of doing an investment firm. We didn't think about it. We landed thankfully with our feet on the ground and figured some options out, and we think of building businesses, building funds, and here you go. This is where we evolved to. How did it play out with you? How did you zero down on being a VC? How did that evolution happen for you? You could have, when you were in the US and you were looking at coming back to India, how did the evolution to from being somebody who was in mainstream to being in the startup landscape, how did that transition? And in that, how did the VC thing play out?
Well, this was much more thought through than just instinctive. I joined McKinsey in 2000 and super blessed to sort of having worked with amazing people on amazing problems with amazing clients. So that was a long journey. I didn't even know what VC meant. A couple of my colleagues and peers and I in Ahmedabad were trying to do startups when I was in 2000, but really didn't understand the whole system. So McKinsey was where I developed an appreciation for how people make decisions. I think a lot of people think how to do analytics and problem solving and structuring, and while that is all important, but being in rooms with decision makers and how are they making decisions, what is motivating them was something very fascinating to me. So the psychology of all of it. So I think somewhere around that time, I'd moved to New York in 2003. And 2006-07, we started doing a lot of private equity work because they needed expertise and they needed someone to just get on the treadmill and help them diligence a company in 3 or 4 weeks at most, sometimes 2, and then obviously help them with portfolio improvements. So I started doing a lot of private equity work in addition to healthcare work, private equity in healthcare, because private equity needed healthcare expertise. I like the fast-paced nature. I like the sort of your ability to track your decisions and the outcome of the decisions, good or bad. Your track record stays forever. In McKinsey, it was fascinating to work with clients on whole range of problems. But sometimes you sort of sweated to create a report, but it didn't sort of get implemented for various reasons. Sometimes internal, sometimes external, budget, all of that. So this was a profession, I thought, in private equity where you could see the outcome of your decision. So it was very satisfying, good or bad. It stays with you. One bad investment 20 years back will still be associated with you. So I thought, oh, wow, there's no other business which has that much of accountability to your talent. So I liked that about it because you couldn't hide under the guise of, hey, I gave good advice, someone didn't listen to it. So I like that. I like the people I was working with. I like the interactions. I like the analytical rigor. I like the people challenges that came along with it. But anyway, things are amazingly well at McKinsey, and I've drunk definitely the Kool-Aid of like, hey, this is the best place because I got a lot of respect, credibility, love at McKinsey. And then somewhere when you get older, you start questioning, and when life has been kind, as you said, what do you want to do when you grow up, right? And it was becoming very clear. New York was becoming Groundhog Day for me, repetitive, not in a bad way. I had access to everything, but I was like, listen, I need to break this mold. Otherwise, the incremental addition to me as an individual is going down with time, right? So I said, okay, where do you want to live? And frankly, because of language and others, it's really India and the US. Maybe London being, at least for me, was a distant third. And I was excited about being in India. This is 2014, 15 timeframe, when I genuinely thought as an economist, you need to make structural changes to India to see the multiplier effect. And I was seeing some, obviously, in an economy like this, which is a behemoth with multiple views, rolls along and there are setbacks and things like that. But for me, it was always structural changes are going to give the multiplier effect, which was really physical infrastructure, digital infrastructure, which was changing. Policies were being simplified, whether it's one tax, and I thought that has the ability to create the multiplier effect. So it became very clear that, hey, I've lived in the US for 15 years, India it is, both for personal and professional reasons. Parents are here in Delhi. And you sort of develop a much deeper appreciation for parents when you grow older, right? And there's
True.
a time when you're like, hey, don't interfere. And then there's a time, listen, I want to spend more and more time with you. So you combine both. And it was like, hey, I want to be in India. And now then it was like, hey, consulting, obviously had done it so many years. It wasn't giving me the incremental growth I needed to be motivated and top of my game. So it was like, okay, what have I done? And here I worked with a lot of coaches. So it wasn't like, because I knew the kind of decision I'm making will have to be, long term. You just
Yeah,
don't switch
for
careers like
sure.
that.
Also,
So
also going with what you said earlier, it's an industry which sees its cycles 20 years down, 10 years for
exactly.
sure at the minimum. You had to be committed in it for a long haul.
Exactly. So I went through a very, very deep psychological, sort of knowing myself.
Yeah.
There's a lot of power to see who you are as an individual and face that person, to say, this is what I like and this is the choice I'm making because this is what I know. And, you're sort of more aware of the consequences. So through this, I think I sort of broke it down into what did I learn in McKinsey? I really learned how to analyze problems. I mean, the ability to recognize patterns became very easy to me. The second is just being able to influence people, like, and as a VC, as a minority, you're not on the driver's seat, but you're trying to influence people to sort of think, and also going back by my own characteristics of the person I am, being a deeply rooted optimist, wanting to be in touch with the youth, what's going to happen. I think about the future a lot. And it sort of jived well with the person I am, the opportunity ahead of me, my past experience and credibility. And it was like, okay, this is what I want to do. And obviously, you could be an investor working for someone or do it yourself. And I did have, grateful that I did have a couple of people ask me to lead the India offices in.
I'm sure.
Um,
I'm sure.
so, but I was like, listen, I'm young. If I don't do it now, and it's funny because a little bit of a reputation I had even at McKinsey was a risk taker, entrepreneurial, getting things done, that stuff. So I was like, I keep doling out this advice to other people to follow their passion. Why am I not doing it myself? So I decided to take this risk, and the rest, as they say in a cliche way, is history.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Alka. And I thought I knew many aspects, but you just linked the dots so beautifully. One thing you said, which is so true. It's an industry which the whole VCP industry needs patience. It needs a lot of analytical perspectives. It needs objectivity and subjectivity together. You do need to be an eternal optimist, otherwise you'll never take the risks. And therefore, that risk-adjusted returns is such a brilliant phrase, which I think it applies to every asset class, but I think it most applies to our asset class, right, to the PVC industry. So I think you just so much epitomize as a personality to what I think is required in this industry. Tell me, Alka, as you know, I have a respect for both the genres. The genre which is mile wide, inch deep, and the genre which is inch wide and mile deep. Being extremely focused as a domain person, picking one narrow aspect, one narrow thesis, one specific sector, and going all the way. You're obviously the latter. Um, was that very easy? Because India
For
had so much
me,
opportunism, and we are very fortunate that we are in a country where the startup scene is exploding on all fronts. I know the funding winter, the challenges, etc. I think that's part and parcel of any industry maturing in any part of the world. But it's just so awesome to see India's startup ecosystem being so secular in terms of across sectors, across industries. What took you to healthcare? What took you to the Sehat?
Yeah, one is just as a person, I've always believed health as an industry is never going out of fashion,
Hmm.
right?
True.
More importantly, I knew healthcare. So remember, a person coming from the US hasn't invested before, hasn't lived in India for 14 or 15 years. I had to play to my strengths,
Hmm.
right? My strength is domain.
Hmm.
And I'd seen enough data where in early stage funds, I'm not talking late and private equity, where expertise matters, and they were outperforming by almost 6 or 7% IRR. In theory, this made sense, but I was quite delighted to see it play out even in numbers. So, what does a person do? You sort of say, "Hey, is this market big enough?" Right? Like any other founder, yes, it is. In the world, on average, you're spending 8% of GDP on healthcare, right? Uh, so it's large and it's never going to go away. Secondly, it's diverse. You have high-end innovation to deep service experience.
Mm-hmm.
Thirdly, it allows for private participation.
Mm-hmm.
So the industry construct was exciting. Uh, the second is you look at the founder's strengths and weaknesses,
Mm-hmm.
and you're like, hey, I know this area well, not just in terms of domain, but networks, operators. So uh, it plays to my strengths. Data bears out that focus funds have performed terrifically well, especially in early stages. So when you add all that, it was an obvious choice to me. Again, go back to the training I have received and the personality, while I'm guided by instinct, of course, but I'm also very analytical. The 17 years at McKinsey made me such. So you look at all the facts and you're like, hey, wait a minute, this is a key differentiator. Not everyone understands health because health is both a populist and very sensitive topic, and it has stakeholders that don't necessarily behave rationally. You got the regulators, you got the insurance, you got the physician, the patient, the many, many suppliers, and they're not all aligned sometimes. So you're having an asymmetrical knowledge here can actually help, and not everyone understands it. I mean, I quote this thing quite often, even during COVID, when you had a risked life, people at some point got fed up and said,
Yeah.
I'm not going to, it sounds irrational if someone says you could
Yeah.
die
I
tomorrow,
remember
be like that.
completely.
So it was a perfect sort of like any other industry structure analysis. The industry structure was right. The founder sort of met the industry structure criteria, and there was a gap in the market.
Mm. Got it. And on top of that, tell me this now. You have a challenge here, Alka. Your challenge is once you've decided to go inch wide mildly, you would need to go mildly. You will need to really go very deep and hold out against all the others who are generalists. Does that mean that you're even within healthcare picking your narrow lane? So there is healthcare services from core caregiving and hospitals to biotech to medtech to service aggregators to midpoint providers to ancillaries to insurance companies on the well-being side. Talk about that. How are you picking your narrow lanes? Because you have to even it's such a massive sector, like you said, 7-8% of the
I
GDP.
think it's an unfair question, actually, because are you going to ask the generalist the same question? Hey,
No.
we're focused on 10, which one narrow lanes? They'll come to sector and say,
Hmm.
oh, within this sector, which narrow lanes? So I've already avoided that question. So I actually don't agree with that question because I'm not picking narrow lanes in a large sector. I'm basically saying healthcare is growing 2 times faster than GDP. It is a perennial need, and there are tailwinds in every aspect. You've got to figure out based on the business model, based on the founding team, which bets are you going to place. So uh, I don't think I agree with you.
So so as long as it's health, well-being, you would feel comfortable navigating the waters anywhere it is.
Yeah, I mean, think about asking a generalist fund.
No, I'm with
With
you.
these five sectors, you'll be so. I think if anything, both in terms of capacity, conviction, both in terms of capacity, conviction, ability to know an industry inside out, I'm just better positioned.
Got it. Got it. No, I completely get it. And Alka, how do you ride the B2B, B2C, or do you not even care about that?
I'm looking for good businesses.
First principles.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Tell me about regulation. You are a very regulated sector per se. In any case, as a AIF, you're heavily regulated. Now, on top of that, when you get into health, that sector is regulated from consumer protection to to waste management to talk about it. And I think
Frankly, any sector, the regulatory if you take climate, EV, solar, highly regulated, right? If you take finance, you can't get more regulated. Regulation has caused many companies to go boom and bust. If you take healthcare, similar. If you take insurance, highly regulated. If you take give me any sector, regulations play a very important role. That's just what happens in a democracy with frankly, much more in an autocracy where it's a little random. But policies, government principles, you've got the standard regulations which apply across sectors. Then you got sector-specific regulations, which are frankly in every sector. So I think health and education are two areas, however, which the government has a social responsibility to deliver as well. That's where the uniqueness comes from. The regulations are interesting in health because especially for innovative products, you need clearances from bodies like the DGCI or FDA or whatever, right? CE, things like that. So there's a little bit of higher bar you just can't launch a face cream in 3 months and say, call it. So you have that, but that's exciting. That is exciting, but the barriers to entry increase. So I think of it again, going back to my, some of these things actually make the moat higher.
Yeah. And that intellectual curiosity also helps you, I think, as a person, enjoy the sector even more, perhaps then.
Sector, and frankly, now you're beginning to recognize patterns. So you're able to expand into adjacencies, right? Because remember when I came into India, I hadn't lived here for a long time. I hadn't invested before. So I was building my craft. You layer on it, and now you're seeing, patterns, and you expand into adjacencies. In fact, we wrote a book, Rohit, I'm not sure you've seen it. It's called The Comic Side of Startup Investing.
I've heard about it.
We laugh a lot at Alkemi, and this is nothing specific to healthcare. It's actually specific to early stage investing. The interaction between lawyers and bankers and founders and VCs and LPs is fascinating. You don't need to impose a sector lens to it. It's just people. It's the same thing. People behave with the same sort of emotions. That's one thing I learned when I was traveling with McKinsey. I mean, when I sort of got the opportunity to be all over, that yes, they dress differently, they eat differently. So from the outside, it looks like they're different, but the human emotions, I mean, I'm sure you've seen the movie Seven, but they talk about the negative side of emotions, but even the positive, whether it's love, hate, envy, pride, all of them are similar motivations, agendas. So, we've invested in a lot of companies, but if you read the book, it's actually a very humorous take on all the characters in the ecosystem, and each one, no fault of theirs, having their own agendas and the humorous conflicts it takes. Now you can sit there and moan about it, or you can take a step back and observe the sort of actions and reactions of different people.
Yeah. No, that's awesome, and glad to see your passion come out alive when you talk about that. So, Alka, tell me one thing now. Here, as Alkemi, you've obviously seen a lot of subsectors like I was talking about. Talk about what excites you most for India right now in the healthcare space, because we're still a country which on one side is dealing with the basics, and on the other side, across industries, we have leapfrogged in many spaces, from telecom to how in our financial service industry, fintech has really come mainstream, UPI being one such great example. Tell me what's exciting you about healthcare.
You sort of, I'm going to just build on the words you used, because healthcare is, it's a dual challenge in India. One is at the base level infrastructure, affordability, awareness. So there are a lot of ideas there. How do I improve the quality of service? How do I improve access to care? How do I bring the latest care? How do I sort of make people healthier from the get-go, right? So there's a lot of, and it could be devices, diagnostics, services, distribution. All of that is aimed towards just building the business infrastructure. And the other end is complete innovation, right? Where you're saying, is design a product that has not existed in the world before. I'm going to find a way to test, I don't know, alcoholism. I'm just making up stuff. By a test that never was done before, or so it's a unique industry where there are leapfrog advances in technology, but also basics, which makes it very interesting sector to play in, because you have the ability to serve a whole range of customers, whole range of stakeholders, physician, patient, hospitals, insurance companies, all of that, at all sorts of price points, at all sorts of vectors of innovation and operational excellence. So just think of the permutations and combinations.
Yeah.
So our job is, frankly, not saying, hey, we are excited about devices and that's da. I think that's a very ignorant view, in my view, to say, if you're excited about this subsector. What does that mean? Devices itself has implants and stents and consumables and, sensor-enabled stuff, lab equipment. You just have so much. What are you excited? Now, that to me is a function. You've got natural tailwinds. You've got to think about the business model, the economics. You've got to think about the founder, the company traction, how well they're positioned, what's the moat. So like any other analysis. So I always shy away from saying, hey, I'm excited about medical devices. I'm excited about pharma complex generics. Like to me, that's a motherhood and apple pie statement.
Got it. And one word you used not too long ago was pattern. You can start seeing the patterns, obviously, now being an incumbent player in the space. A thing which really excites me about health is it's just so naturally swimming in data, right? And that too, longitudinal data. I doubt any industry has as much data, and that too on a very coherent longitudinal pattern. Obviously, the data breaks. There are privacy reasons, and there are policy reasons, and there are several reasons why it breaks. But it is fascinating as an industry how much data this sector generates. What's your next cutting edge thing in terms of what do you think is bound to happen in India, which hasn't happened?
A little bit of a misnomer that I think fintech has more data, retail has more data, because they've already transactions and things like that. So I think there's a lot more data. In healthcare, it's private data, and it wasn't very structured. Right? And who are the data buyers? They are organized companies, which is pharma and hospitals. So
and insurance.
And insurance. But again, at the end of the day, pharma companies want to sell more medicine, so they need different kind of data. At scale, I've not seen the adoption of data and the usage of data that high in India, relative to even data and analytics, the way you see it elsewhere. But even people have a lot of data. They have not figured out what to do with that data. What do I do by saying, hey, 20 years back, your platelet count was that, 15 years back, it was this, 10 years back, it was this, 5 years back, it was this. Doctors analyzing today. What is it today? And I need to treat it today. So I think there's a little bit of a misunderstanding of how people are going to use this clinical data. For research, maybe, but for day-to-day, I mean, if I have a high ESR today, I want to be treated for an acute infection. My longitudinal data doesn't affect me, right? I go to the doctor today with a flu. He's going to get me to do some tests, and he's going to treat me on those symptoms. He's not going to look at my 10-year data. Did I have high ESR then? And there's some diseases where patterns matter. So I think we've got to be careful about what does this data give me. Of course, in research, it can, hey, this kind of a female of 20, if she has a platelet count there's the likelihood that you will get to here, or just making up any biomarker you can pick, it will be this. But those are going to be predictive algorithms, not definitive. So there's a lot to be done there. I think that thought needs to be paid about how it can be used. I think where it can be used is triaging. Definitely, it's happening, for example, in radiology, or AI doctors, where you're saying, "Hey, listen, this is the first sort of advice we get based on these symptoms." So there is a bit of that, but how do you monetize it and how do you make it trusted by physicians is still.
Yeah. And Alka, how's it been raising capital for you? It's you've obviously built a
It's getting
fund.
better day by day, day by day, day by day. Look, this is a long process. Remember when I said when I decided to come here, I had no illusions. That is tough, right? You don't like. I've seen people. Oh, 100 million. It's easy to tell me one person who had easy time raising 100 million.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of a, yeah, you'll always have the normal distribution curve. 10% of people will find it very easy. 10% of people will never be able to raise. And 80% will be somewhere in the middle where some of them, after struggling for 2, 3 years, will manage to meet, all sorts of people, right? So I was under no illusion it's going to be easy. So when you're mentally prepared, and the kind of person I am is like, hey, you keep, I used to ski a lot.
It's a problem solving for you all over again.
No, and I had a ski instructor in the US, and I remember when I went to the top of the mountain and tried to come down, and I'm like, oh my God, this is such a steep mountain. And his advice to me is just like, look, 10 meters ahead, don't even bother about it. Within 5 minutes, you were down the mountain because you were just focused on the 10, 20 meters. Of course, ultimately you get down at the bottom of the mountain, but if you start looking and talking about how difficult it is, or how this, you keep chipping at it bit by bit, you build your reputation. I have zero problem facing rejection. I don't take it personally. I don't care. I have something to offer. If you see value in me, and if you think I will work my best to make sure you have returns with the risk caveats, then of course I'd love to have you. But I have absolutely zero illusions about fundraising is not tough. It is tough. People get to know you. People like you. People see your thesis. Some will believe. Most will say no. It is fine. And that's how you build an institution. Bit by bit, focus on the talent, focus on delivering returns, focus on learning from mistakes. And I genuinely think that's what we are doing.
Yeah. And you're so right in what you said, Alka, because for any emerging fund manager coming to it thinking, and these are, by the way, smartest people like you, right? I think one thing we are so proud about this industry, it attracts talent like nowhere. Pretty much like top tier consulting, the whole VCP industry has attracted talent across the world. And therefore, the comfort with facing rejection, the ability to understand that fundraising will go through cycles, and it's going to go through all kinds of challenges, and it's bound to happen, and capital will chase more predictable returns. And predictability doesn't necessarily mean it's the best, but it's just that that's where people find comfort. I think you pretty much spoke as if I could play this out to an emerging manager on things to do, not to do when you're raising capital. So loved hearing that. What are you doing about you're now going to every passing year you're getting a more mature face to the fundraising world. A key metric which will soon come and look at you, and I know it's already it's already in your mind, is DPI. It's like it's the North Star metric for at least for the large institutional investors. That's how they look at it. Talk about it. How are you thinking about it? How are you working
about
towards
managing expectations? A private equity firm timelines would be different from a late stage VC to a seed stage VC to an early stage VC. So I think smart LPs will recognize that these product classes are different. You can't compare a Series B, C investor to a pre-Series A, Series A investor by definition. And that is linked to the timelines of exits. Sometimes I see, hey, I want exits in 3, 4 years. Certain kind of industries can provide you that. Certain kind of, you look, the US has had, what do you call the VC industry existing since, much earlier than that, but really beginning to be organized and big names come in 1994, right? so as an industry. So you've got enough longitudinal data to show in the US what the timelines are. So for pre-Series A, Series A, it's 5 to 7 years, right? Post-investment. So if your investing cycle is first 4 years, by definition, it's going to be in the 7 to 10 years time frame. That's why we have, and there's certain areas that allow for faster. So I manage the expectations of LPs quite well, increasingly so because we recognize the realities. Of course, options for DPI expanding as the market is getting mature. People are understanding there will be primaries, there will be secondaries. You will have to clean up the cap table. Many more funds getting interested, which means much more capital being willing to do this. So it's improving. Like I said, it's you have to. US is the most sophisticated market. You got to take that as a benchmark, right? Say, okay, this is the average. India can accelerate, probably in some places, yes, some places, no. And then you basically explain to your LPs, this is what we can and we cannot do. Are you still okay with that? And that's fair enough. Yeah. And today options are increasing. I most things, they're not revolutions, they're evolutions.
Yeah. No, you're so right. You started with that. I love that phrase, by the way. I'm sure it'll stay with us. Alka, you're right. The whole benchmark is kind of the US industry in that sense. It's seen this asset class really grow, mushroom. Also, there's a lot of benchmarking, a lot of data. So what we did not too long ago was, as Oyster, becoming an institutional investor in the space in India, and we were one of the first ones, right? As a private, you have SIDBI, you have NIF, but on the private side, we were perhaps one of the first institutional fund of fund. One of the things which we realized very quickly is there's so much of lack of benchmarking data. There's the baselines are missing, the sectors are kind of colliding and overlapping. So what we did was we partnered with CRISIL, and we basically spent about 7-8 cycles of 6 months each, benchmarking many vintages. I think we benchmarked vintages going all the way back to 2011.
CRISIL, Preqin, and NSL are doing that now as part of the exercise. But again, they are doing self-reported data, right? Which of course is good because that's the only way. But I think SEBI is trying to bring in valuation consistencies and things like that as well. And now N is not equal to, I mean, I was watching the CRISIL data in category 2, they are 59 or 60, they had something like that. But even within that, there's a large spectrum because a lot of them are category 2, but some of them
absolutely. Actually, that was one of the biggest reasons why we started, because in category 2, you'll have a VC and you'll also have a PE. And then they would just say, hey, here is category 2 all benchmarked. And in category 3, you will have some pipes and you will have some
PMSs, but even that will have some focus funds, but then N wasn't large enough because in true sense, you had more than 100 firms only in 2018 onwards. So you've not got enough of a cycle. You got N is equal to very small. So you can't be making judgments on that. So that is, again, something that you develop over time. So the best bet you have is, okay, US has longitudinal data. This is benchmarks. Let's see how the Indian guys are doing relative to that. And when you add up that, you normalize it by a factor of whatever is necessary, so you get more data. I mean, that's how I would approach it at McKinsey.
Yeah.
Because otherwise the N is, of 5 funds, they have an average of 1.5 and 0.6 DPI. But I'm like, one fund is in Series B stage, one fund is pre-Series A. It doesn't make sense. One is focused, one is not. One is real estate, one is not. One is tech, one is not. One is traditional. You just have so many because the return profiles are different, right? From an LP point of view, hey, I want to go for the highest return. Then you're like, okay, then highest return, highest liquidity, go for public. Why are you even bothering with private?
Right. I love the mixing of the McKinsey animal with the VC person. Absolutely loved it. No, yeah. So you're so right. So the point I was coming to, Alka, was it's a delight seeing people like you come together, because from having seen this industry where people would not even think about sector specialists, like I'll call you, to today where when we were doing this CRISIL partnership and bringing out this report, I still recall that back in 2011, the total of industry was perhaps $150, $200 million. That was about the size. 14 years later, it is 100 billion. Back in the day, the total amount of money going into, let's say, a sector like climate was 0.4 of that tiny 150, 200. And of this 100 billion, it's as large as 10x the size. It's 4% of a 100 billion base. So when you look at a sector which is so fundamental to life, and you kind of put it in the basics of life, like sehat and well-being, I think health and health cutting through consumption patterns, health cutting to innovation, health cutting to core caregiving services, continuum of life. I think it's just such an integral sector to everything we do. So I can't tell you how much I'm excited about what I've seen with you, heard from you, and look forward to what you're going to be accomplishing over the next many years, Alka. Many vintages, let's use our BCP industry word. We're going to see many vintages of Alka and Alkemi play out. So congratulations on building Alkemi. Absolutely love this conversation. I'm sure you and I will continue many more from here. This is just the beginning. And thanks for joining us.
No, thank you for the opportunity, and I was quite open, and I hope that was fine.
We loved it. We absolutely loved it.